Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel on UTC's Universal Trusted Credentials. It sounds like quite a mysterious acronym, but we are hopefully going to be able to unpack that during the course of this conversation and explain to you what UTC is about. But perhaps before even we get started and before I give a brief introduction of the UTC topic, my name is Ayaz. I am with UNDP, the global lead for fintech and digital innovations for sustainable development, and I have the pleasure to be surrounded by outstanding panelists today from different parts of the world, and I would love to have them introduce themselves in a few words. So I'll start with you, Dr. Maxwell, if you want to give a brief introduction, please.
Thank you very much, Ayaz. My name is Maxwell Opoku-Afari, First Deputy Governor, Bank of Ghana, Supervising Governor for so many departments, including the payment systems and the fintech.
Thank you, Ayaz, for the opportunity to be here. My name is Manuel Marqués. I am the Director of Financial Innovation and Market Infrastructure at the Bank of Spain. And I am like the outsider on this panel, and I'm happy to learn from all these guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayaz. My name is Kay Duker, and I'm the CEO of Development Bank of Ghana. We have a mandate to foster the growth of a competitive private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarat. I'm the Director of Payment System Department of the National Bank of Cambodia. And of course, my portfolio involved mostly in the payment system and fintech development back in Cambodia. Thank you, and happy to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So maybe I'll start by giving a very brief introduction on what UTC is, but I think those panelists are going to be in a much better position than I am to actually explain UTC, because I talk about it, but they're actually implementing it and living it in real life context. But really, UTC is a joint project that was launched globally by the Monetary Authority of Singapore together with UNDP. And the main challenge we've been trying to address here is the lack of trust and the lack of information between MSMEs and financial institutions that leads to financial exclusion. And so the concept, the heart of the concept was, how can we actually use fintech and digitalization to capture a whole range of information about MSMEs, about their business identity, about their behavior, about their financial transactions, about their business operations in one consolidated, centralized space in a way that is trusted, that is verified by trusted sources, so that it can be exposed to financial institutions for them to be able to start making credit decisions about MSMEs and start giving loans to financial, just not loans, but also other financial services and potentially even insurance products to MSMEs. And so as part of the program, we've started designing a pilot for Ghana. The pilot is currently being designed in Cambodia, Indonesia, in Rwanda. And we are very fortunate to actually have Dr. Maxwell with us to talk about the Ghanaian experience so that it gives a tangible, very concrete, real form and shape to UTCs. It's not just a concept, even though we've launched a white paper this week, but it's actually an actual implementation in practice that is starting to transform how we are thinking about MSME finance. So Dr. Maxwell, would you like to tell us a bit about the Ghanaian journey? What is it that drew you towards UTC? What was the initial sort of incentive for you to get involved in this? What kind of problem is it trying to solve? How did the implementation go? What are the challenges? What are the hopes and the positive signs? Over to you to inspire us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayaz. You know, if you're a regulator from the central bank involved in economic policy, especially in terms of delivery of credit to the private sector, then delivery of credit to the micro sector is very key, because that's what becomes transformational. That's what is able to transform the economy. But as you mentioned, if you look at the way the financial institutions behave, it's clearly, credit was not going to the micro sector of the economy, mostly because of issue of risk. And the risk was coming from the lack of trust, and the lack of trust is coming from lack of available and consistent data that they can understand and they can trust the data. So we quickly identified data as a binding constraint to be able to deliver credit to the core of the economy that can lead to broad-based growth, inclusive growth, and shared growth. And so being able to come up with a program that can bring about trust in data was something that was critical and something that was very important to the central bank. And that's where UTC comes in. Because UTC, the investor trusted credentials, is, before we thought of UTC, we've been struggling to think of how we can do things differently. And so UTC presented a platform and an opportunity to have an alternative form of data that we can trust, alternative form of data that can create a common platform for an engagement between financial institutions and MSMEs. And that alternative form of data is what forms the basis of the investor trusted credentials. Working together with MES and Prostera, we'll be able to put this together to be able to look at existing data that the MSMEs already have in Ghana. And you see, Ghana has introduced what we call the Ghana card. And that Ghana card is a biometric card that is linked to so many other databases in Ghana. So it becomes a single point of identification and unique identification for individuals and also for businesses in Ghana. And that Ghana card became the core of the data that can be trusted because it's been verified and is available for all to access. And you don't need to get the MSMEs to submit that to you. It is linked to their social security. It is linked to their tax history. It is linked to their passport. It's linked to their vehicle licensing. It's linked to their health records. So it's linked to so many other databases in the country. That became the core of the data solution problem. That once we're able to identify that, then that gives us about close to 60% of the data needed. And we are still struggling with doing some of the data manually. That together helps us to be able to look at their AML and CFT compliance records, which is also a database that exists. It also helps us to have their tax history record, which is also linked to their Ghana card, and it exists. It also helps us to have their trade credit record, which is also available, and you can have access to it. And when putting all this together, we're able to identify or create a metric that helps you to be able to establish their intent to pay. And that intent to pay is then used as an alternative source of trusted credentials that can help financial institutions to be able to then have direct engagement with these MSMEs and begin to engage with them in terms of credit delivery. Fortunately, and I think Kay will go into that, the Development Bank of Ghana also had this mandate to be able to deliver wholesale financing to SMEs. And so they came on board to be able to then underwrite the credit to the commercial banks that are going to participate in this UTC powered credit delivery program. And that helped us to be able to then put a framework together and try to identify one commercial bank. We started with one commercial bank because the central bank has also introduced a regulatory sandbox. And because this is a new field and we're not sure about the performance of this UTC, we decided to introduce this in the regulatory sandbox and try to put in place all risk mitigation measures. Key risk mitigation measure that was very critical to us from the financial stability point of view was the fact that the bank that is participating in this pilot in the sandbox, assuming the total amount of credit they are ready to go out with under the UTC program goes bad, how is that going to impact on the balance sheet of that particular bank? If it's going to be systemic to the balance sheet of that particular bank, then this has to be looked at again. So all those were taken into consideration to make sure that the risk from this sandbox pilot is not that systemic and critical to the balance sheet of the commercial bank. And based on that, the Bank of Ghana gave approval to CBG, Consolidated Bank of Ghana, underwritten by Development Bank of Ghana, to start giving loans to MSMEs using the UTC credentials to be able to identify intent to pay and use that as a proxy for ability to pay, and started giving out loans. So far, CBG has given out close to $300,000 loans to different MSMEs in the sandbox. And we are yet to receive the first monthly report to the committee that gave approval in the sandbox to see the performance of these loans. And these loans went to different sectors and different small micro entities that are using it to transform their businesses. And so we are very hopeful. We are extremely hopeful that this intent to pay as a proxy for tangible collateral will work out to the extent that the risk will be mitigated and we'll be able to scale this up significantly by bringing in more commercial banks to participate in that.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Maxwell. And I'll come back to you a little bit about the challenges that you encountered along the way and the journey. But one thing that's very striking to me is the very structured approach that you have taken step by step, using a regulatory sandbox, trying to understand what the risks are going to be on the portfolios of the banks and so on and so forth. And it's a very progressive, but also very structured manner of approaching it. My sense was for a commercial bank to start using those type of different data points to start making credit decisions is not going to be easy as a first step. And probably, as we encounter in many countries, they're going to be asking for some sort of guarantees or some sort of underwriting. And I assume, Kwamina, that's where you actually come into the scene where, of course, turning to you, and I understand you've been a major underwriter of this project, but can you tell us a bit more about how you got engaged in this and what was sort of the gaps you were trying to fill with the commercial banks or the risks you were trying to mitigate by bringing that underwriting facility?
No, thank you, Ayaz. Call me Kay. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, Dr. Maxwell's really given, the detail, and the point I really wanted to make is that for this to succeed, two things need to happen, and they're really fundamental. One is a central bank that is supportive, not only in terms of financial stability and the regulatory issues, but a central bank that is focused on innovation and really looking to support the economy in a very direct and practical manner. And so we're blessed in having that kind of central bank. The other issue that was key to this is the fact that we're the only development bank in the country, but being a development bank and a wholesale lender to banks, we are actually a super convener. And what that means is that we get data from everybody. All the banks give us the data because we supply liquidity to them. All the SMEs give us their data because they want to get loans, they want to get help with their supply chains, et cetera, so we get all that data. And because we're essentially, our stakeholders are government and development partners, we also all get all that government data. And so we have that combination coming together that allows us to really build the universal trusted credentials, which I want to break up into two. So the first piece that Dr. Maxwell went through in deep detail are what we call the trusted credentials. And that really, for us at the moment, is 150 data points that come from the banks and all the bank data, the SME data, and the government data. Tax data, we have links, direct links to GRA, the vehicle licensing, all that kind of data. And so all those 150 data points give us a very good picture of, as Dr. Maxwell said again, the capability to pay and the intent to pay. So we're very comfortable in that respect in terms of supporting that process. But when you add the word universal to that, then you start talking about global supply chains and how you bring those trusted credentials into that. And that's where Proxtera and the MAS have also played a very supportive part, because the only way you can deliver a universal trusted credential, not just a national one, is by tokenization and digitization. And so the work that Proxtera have done at the moment is to take those 150 and then to tokenize them so that now suppliers in Asia can look at our SMEs in Ghana and say, yes, I trust that credential. Yes, I trust that standard. And I know that the intent to pay and the willingness to pay is there. But when you put all that together, and the key word there is trust, you realize that what we've done is we've actually got SMEs and banks to start talking the same language. Because what that has led to is something actually which I think has really been a sea change in the way that we lend and in the way that the SMEs behave. And that behavioral change is that now the banks are beginning to move towards having common underwriting terms. which are codified and documented. So it doesn't become like a black box when the SME turns up going, how do I get a loan? It's all there. And now the SME requirements are also very clear, and education is the key part of that. And so the SMEs know exactly what they have to do to get the loan. But they don't actually have to provide a huge amount of documents because we look at these 150 data points. So we see what they do, what they have to do, and we could quickly advise them about behavior and about changing behavior. And so when you put those two together, we now have banks and SMEs, and this is key, speaking the same language. And that is a big change in all the disconnects that we used to have in the system. And we hope to build on that and then build to scale. Thank you. Yeah.
This is, thanks for sharing, Kate. This is an amazing story of, as you were saying, banks starting to talk to SMEs and MSMEs in a way that was not possible before around trusted data points. I'd like to go to Sarat in a second, but I'll stop by Jose Manuel, who's been listening very carefully, because you come from Central Bank of Spain. And obviously, you have a number of MSMEs and SMEs also in your own country that might require financing. But you're also having a very particular connection to Latin America in many different ways. And so when you hear those stories coming from Ghana, and we'll hear soon the story coming from Cambodia, how does that resonate with you in terms of the way you're looking at this, the potential that you see in it, even in Europe, potentially, but beyond in other geographies? Like, what's your reflection on it as you hear this emerging story that's quite exciting, in fact, in terms of how it's connecting MSMEs and banks finally for the first time, in most cases, together?
Yeah, for me, it's really an amazing story. The first time you talk about this to me is really shocking for me, and you share the white paper is really amazing. I think that is quite striking because you realize that we are in a more connected, more digitalized world, but at the same time we have some problem on SMEs. And there are also fields, and I think that maybe you told later on that are new fields of new information, like for example, all the information related with ESG, with green finance, that is new for the SMEs, and they are not used. Even in other countries that have more standardization on information they provide and they have some more requirements, this is completely new information. Then what I see that this initiative clearly brings is to have more coordination on what is required, and also to identify, and I think that this is an important part of the project, to identify the credibility of the sources where the information came from. Then thinking on the future, I think that there are several issues that could be think in order to scale up this initiative, because the experiences are really amazing. They have a lot of potential. I agree with you that this step by step, carefully using the sandbox is a very prudent way to introduce this one and to gain the credibility of the banks on this kind of information to explore this one. I will say that some potential also is to bring other kind of alternative finance, not only the international finance for other banks, but also the startups or the fintechs, one that they have access to this information to manage in a different way. Then you can have more sources of providing finance. But I will say that given that you have different realities in different parts of the world, one thing that I would like to see in the project is a broad scope and range of several areas in the world. Because I understand that the sources and the specificities of each region could be clearly different. Then to include, for example, Latin American countries, or to include East Europe, that could be very important from some of these countries also, and to have a broad coverage in order to know what are the local characteristics in different regions, and to take this into account into the platform that you want to rise, could be clearly important issues. I will stop here.
No, but that's great, and I'll actually come back to you a bit later on one of the points you made about taking this international. I guess not just international in terms of some specific countries and markets, but also international in terms of cross-border. And I would like to get your thoughts a bit later on the cross-border aspects of it, because we've been talking about UTC in domestic contexts, in how it can actually really unlock financing for MSMEs, but also from an international cross-border trade perspective, it might actually also be transformative. So I'll come back to you on this in a moment, if you don't mind. But Sarat, in Cambodia, you've been championing MSME development. I know that it's ranking very, very high on the agenda of National Bank of Cambodia. And I guess you've also started the UTC journey, but you're probably a little bit behind from already piloting. You're in the design process of the pilot. But how do you respond to what's been said so far, and how does it fit within your SME and MSME development strategy? And how do you see UTC actually fitting in that and supporting that?
Okay. Thank you. So before moving to that, I just want to briefly explain about the journey, the progress of Cambodia in terms of developing our SME in the process. So first, let me start with the regulation. So we are at the regulation stage. Maybe a bit better to start with regulation, but I won't boring you with all this law and regulation stuff. So we introduced a couple of regulatory framework, what we call the SME laws back then, and also later on, it kind of collected effort between the government institution to introduce what we call the security and action law. So this law basically allow SME to operate in very convenient ways, and then can interact with financial institutions. And in addition to that, the government also established the institutional arrangement for SME supporting. Like for example, we established SME bank, and also we established what we call the credit information sharing for SME within our country. So these are basically involved with the regulatory framework. In addition to that, on the financial part, the National Bank of Cambodia taking the major role in this financial part. We encourage financial institutions to introduce various types of financial products, including the non-collateral lending, because the major obstacle for SME is basically the lack of collateral. And in addition to that, we also encourage financial institutions to look at various financial products, like, for example, asset lending, credit financing, and peer-to-peer lending, for example. That is the financial part. And the last part is on the technological part. In terms of technological part, the government tried to introduce the online UTC system for the SME, and also the online invoicing and tax filing for SME, for example, like that. In addition to that, we also work with the UN project in Cambodia to introduce the concept of UTC. And this concept is very important for SME because it provides the universal trusted credential for them to access the various financing from every financial institution within our country. So we work with the UN team and with a couple of commercial banks in Cambodia to materialize this in the future. But at the moment, it's still in the pilot phase. We will see the fruit of the project in the near future. So I think just one point is that the concept of UTC is very important, given the challenge we're facing with similar to other countries, especially with the issue of lacking collateral, high interest rate, cumbersome every 30% years, and the knowledge of SME to obtain financing from financial institutions. So with the interaction of this, I think we can resolve all this major issue for SME within our country. So I stop here. Thank you, Aya.
No, thanks. It's great, and it will be really interesting to hear once you start piloting the outcome of the pilot. And I suppose that the guarantee issue or the underwriting issue is also valid in Cambodia? Will you need to have a guarantee to give the incentive to commercial banks to get into this?
Yeah, of course, we will look into that, and I know it's hard to tell what is on, but the guarantee aspect, probably that's something that we need to look at in the future in terms of when we come to the state that we need to underwriting all these SME loan to the public using this UTC framework.
Thanks. So going back to Dr. Maxwell and Kay, actually you can complement each other on this, but the concept sounds very promising. The way you've been talking about it and the way you've been describing it, it's actually transformational. But there must be some challenges on the ground. When you talk about 150 data points, for example, I guess there's a level of digitalization that's required to be able to collect those data points. So can you tell us a little bit about the upside? I think it's pretty clear in terms of potential and prospects, but in terms of some of the challenges that you've encountered since you started the journey, whether it's technical, operational, It's more advocacy-related, awareness building, maturity of the SMEs and their own understanding of what this means for them. What are some of the issues and some of the challenges you've come across?
I think there are a number of challenges, of course, with a very transformational program like this. In terms of the maturity of the MSMEs, I know as part of the program, DBG has organized a lot of training programs and capacity building programs for about 4,000 of these MSMEs that are potential beneficiaries of this program. But coming into the operational aspect of the entire credit delivery using the trusted credentials in the sandbox, what I have gathered, and I think I indicated that in my earlier comment, is the fact that we still do not have all the data points digitized. And so it's only about 60 or so % that are digitized, and it makes it easy to verify the credentials. The rest that are submitted manually, my understanding, and from what I've seen, is that we still continue to have inconsistencies in the data that are submitted by the MSMEs themselves to the bank. And so once you have that, then it comes back to the issue of the original problem. The original problem is the issue of trust in the data. And so once you begin to get some of this coming in that you need to cross-check, and you go and cross-check, and you see inconsistencies in there, that is one of the key challenges for the program going forward. And our expectation is that going forward, we'll be able to get access to a bit more database so that we can minimize these risks and inconsistencies coming in there. Because the moment we get to a point where that trusted credential is begin to break down, then this whole concept breaks down. And data consistency is very key to that. I don't know, maybe Kay can add to that.
No, thank you, Governor. I mean, with all these things, I mean, there'll be some big challenges. And I think a lot of it is, the core of it has been the education. So we've spent some time with Proxtera, MAS, and the central bank putting together a curriculum, effectively a curriculum for the SMEs, basically to begin for them to understand how to get the loans and then how to move on from that process, how to understand how the financial system works and how to bring them into very much a financial inclusion kind of program for them to get a better understanding of what's required, particularly on the base tenets of capability to pay and intent to pay. So that's been going on, and as Governor said, we've had about 4,000, I think in the moment it's about 5,000, all going through that process. And we incentivize them by actually charging them so that it's not completely free, but I think it's just about $1. But it makes them go through that whole process because they all want to get to the stage where then they're accepted by the banks, et cetera, in terms of moving on. We've also spent a lot of time also training and working with the banks in terms of capacity building because we don't really have, to date, long-term financing. And our core mandate, or one of our core mandates, has been to provide long-term local CD, our currency, local CD financing to the private sector. Today, long-term is probably about maybe 3 to 5 years. After that, it's very little in the local currency. But we're pushing that envelope out to 10 to 15 years. And so, of course, there has to be credit training. There has to be an understanding of the risks. And we're having a lot of support from our development partners and also from the central bank in terms of training and having seminars and capacity building in that respect. The other issue, again, is when you're starting something new, and you spoke about the guarantee, is providing that incentive for the commercial banks to begin that process and then to accept the fact that it's worth a try to see how things are going along. And we have some examples already which we're beginning to incorporate into the program. So we have an entity called GERSL, pretty much supported by exactly the same stakeholders, government and World Bank, UNDP, your guys, et cetera, in that respect. And GERSL provides guarantees in the agricultural space. And so the history of what they've done is actually very educative to us as we begin that process. So I'll share a little of that with you. So their mandate is initially to provide partial credit guarantees. 70, 80% for agricultural businesses and for the banks to be able to support agricultural business. And what they found out over the last 3 years is that banks now come to them in terms of establishing whether a trade or a transaction is bankable or not. Not to buy the guarantee, but to use them as a knowledge partner in terms of going through the credit application and making sure that they understand whether it's bankable or not. And if it's bankable, they don't buy the guarantee. And if it's not bankable, even at 20%, they don't buy the guarantee. Right. So it's actually quite interesting, that evolution, because at the end of the day, even as you provide the guarantee, the key thing is that the deal has to be bankable, whether at 100% or 20%. So their role is beginning to change from providing that guarantee is actually helping the banks find bankable products. And in that, they've been extremely successful. And they've now, as you begin to see, not only are they providing technical support, they're now providing capacity building. So now, this year alone, I know 4 or 5 banks that have set up agricultural desks, where before they didn't. So this is a key change again, where now we begin to go into a key area of the economy that needs transformation. And it's working, but not from how we originally intended it, in terms of just providing guarantees willy-nilly, but in terms of being knowledge partner and information. The third area comes back to, as we move from lending into the supply chain, what the issues are. And there are issues, as you know, in many emerging countries in terms of foreign exchange risks. How do you handle those foreign exchange risks? How do you handle the issues of trade finance, demurrage, etc.? And so this is now the next step for us. How do we work and solve those problems to be able to make sure that on the currency side, we'll think about how we can provide more certainty in terms of the currency fluctuations, how we can help automate that whole process in terms of demurrage and supply chain, etc. And Proxtera and MAS Central Bank, again, have been big supporters. And we're working through a couple of use cases at the moment. Either we set up an SPV to support that, either we use one of our international banks in terms of providing that. But we need, certainly at the beginning, we need to provide more certainty on some of those risks that we see, particularly in terms of the supply chain. So it's a lot of exciting things that we have ahead of us in the coming year. Thank you.
Thanks. Quite a few important points that have been mentioned. Bankability, capacity building, training, consistency of data. I was actually running a digital lending startup for quite some time, and consistency of data has been one of the biggest challenges that I have faced. So those points are all very, very relevant. And your point about supply chains and Forex takes me to our friend Jose Manuel, because obviously cross-border, and Forex is part of the cross-border solution that needs to be brought, is going to be extremely important in terms of use cases of UTC, not just domestic. And of course, in Europe, it might be a bit easier, but beyond it gets more difficult. What are your perspectives on the cross-border aspect of UTC? What might be required? What we might need to think about from your lens?
I think that the part related with FX is a completely different thing to deal. It's very, very important, but I think that is outside of the scope of the initiative. This initiative basically is to provide data to a lot of investors, a lot of lenders that are no longer based on banking relationship, but based on analysis of data. Then you can spread this amount of this information in a different way of doing banking. Then what I think is critical in providing this one, first is trust in this kind of data. Then first you need some base on the local side that this is successful in order to be used for other investors, for other banks, or for other fintechs in other places. What is another thing is important, and I think is the whole governance in the platform. This should be something credible. You have a lot of thinking about that on the white paper, and I think that this governance should be clear, should be transparent, should be operational also. It's important to have a broad representation of all the stakeholders, but also have a clear steering committee on that. And I think that the third issue that is very important in order to reach this capability cross-border is the platform itself. That is, you should take into account the local characteristic, but also build a platform managed by a credible manager and by a credible institution, and at the same time to be useful from different parts of the world and be understandable what are the content of this platform. Then to manage these two things is not easy. In my department, I manage things that are used in several central banks, and this is not very easy to keep and to maintain this one. Then I think that this is an important operational challenge once that you try to grow and to scale up and to go international, that need to be faced. That is how I build a platform that is useful in a local terms, but is also useful in a more international terms.
So proof of concept domestically, growth, engagement of the entire ecosystem, and then start taking this international through the proper governance structure and the proper operating structure as well at the platform level, which are all very important points we need to work on together. Sarat, maybe coming back to you on this, talking about the cross-border aspect, but also the domestic depth you're trying to create on MSME finance, are there any specific sectors that you're actually trying to drive and you want to test UTC with? Are there specific areas that you think are going to be more promising because you're going to solve a bigger problem? And it could be domestic or regional, could be international. What are the areas you want to be focusing on?
At the moment, we're still trying to do at the moment. I mean, in terms of cross-border part, we just want to let you know that we have a project with the MES, which is the FTC, which what we call the FTC, Financial Transparency Corridor, the work that we're working with MES right now. The intention of the project is that to allow SME in our country to meet the financing need in Singapore in case that they have a needs, and then allow our SME to deal with SME in Singapore. That project aims to build trust between both sector, both countries. In terms of sector, I mean, Cambodia is more a agriculture country. We might focus more on this sector so that SME in Cambodia and SME in other countries can engage from one to another. So building this trust between the two countries is a painful process. We need support from the like Jose mentioned, is the infrastructure. We need to have trusted infrastructure. We need to have standardized framework between the two countries, and then we need regulatory support from the regulator as well. So I mean, it's still work in the process. Hopefully that we can complete it in the near term. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So we just have a few minutes left. I'd like to invite a final comment from each one of you. And I was thinking about the question I wanted to ask for the final comment. Perhaps maybe if we start looking into the future, let's imagine that in 3 years' time, we all come back to SFF on that stage. What's the story that you would like to tell about UTC in 3 years from now?
I mean, for me, what I will want to be able to sit on this platform to talk about is the fact that we've been able to scale it up, and it has become transformational because, as I started by saying, access to credit by the MSMEs is the binding constraint to unlocking broad-based, inclusive, and shared growth in developing countries. And if we're able to use this as a transformational platform to be able to give access to MSMEs to credit, this is going to change the growth trajectory in most of our countries. And I want to be able to share that story by saying that we've been able to scale up from one bank and maybe even moved it out of the sandbox into the mainstream credit delivery by the commercial banks.
Thanks, that's amazing. I look forward to that, to hearing that. Jose Manuel, at your end.
I would like to say that this will be global public good that clearly changed that clearly remove any barriers that countries, that SMEs are having regarding any kind of data lack of accessibility in any kind of fields, on ESG, on solvency, in any aspect. And that this clearly changed the access of different providers to different parts of the world.
So really an empowering layer for all the market participants to start tapping into that resource that will be a global open public good for everyone. Great point as well. So that's going to also help scale everywhere else, right? Okay.
I think in 3 years' time, if we get it right, it'll probably be so boring that nobody will want to talk about it. It just exists. But I completely agree with the 2 points that were made by Dr. Maxwell and Jose, which is that it really will be transformational, because this is actually the way to change the current trajectory and really build sustainable prosperity. But what it also does is show the power of collaboration, because you're seeing that a lot of what we're talking about is breaking down silos. And even as we look at the next phase, which is the supply chain, a lot of that work has already been done, because the payment industry in Africa, in Ghana, is one of the largest. So there's so much that we are going to learn from them as we build those supply chain solutions. And so the key thing, I hope that comes out in 3 years, is the importance of collaboration and working together, private and public sector together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for this. And Sarat, maybe to end with you.
I mean, like I mentioned, we're still in the process of having this UTC in the future. So probably in the next 5 years, we hopefully that we can run and operationalize these UTCs in our countries, and then we can use this across the border as well. So that's our hope in the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think we're reaching the end of this panel. I told you at the beginning that they would be talking about UTC much better than I would be able to. So I would like to give them, please, a round of applause for sharing their time and knowledge with us. Thank you very much. And thank you for being with us, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.